All right. So my first question to start this time off with you, I should introduce you a little more to say that for those wanting to get to know Susan's work and Susan Harper's life, I highly recommend the beautiful video that was done because it really takes you through your process of growth and all the many tributaries of exploration you've gone down through. Watermarks Arts created a video, and it's on Continuum Montage. I will add it to your resources when you get this recording. Um, so I'm not going to go into Susan's life and all that she's done. I want to get down to business about fluid movement and the beautiful work. So my first question to you is, how did your mother find Emilie?
Yeah, my mother, we were in Tucson, Arizona, and my mother was working at a mental health center. And the, the woman who was the director of that mental health center had gone to a humanistic psychology conference. I don't know where that was. And Emilie had presented there. And it was the only time Emilie ever presented at a conference like that in those early years. And she talked Emilie into coming to Tucson to do a 5-day workshop. Emilie didn't like to travel at that time at all and didn't want to leave her studio, which was like big and thriving happening. But she agreed. And then I didn't have the money. So my mother talked me into doing it. I'm like, a dance workshop, I don't know how to dance. And she said, no, 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 it's strange, slightly shamanic. I think you'll like it. So she enrolled me. Thank you, Mary Jane, and I took that 5-day workshop and moved with Michael Stearns 2 weeks later to live in Los Angeles, a place that we said we would never, ever, ever, ever live. Thought I was going just for a few months, and then I'm still here.
Yeah, you sure are.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question. Put thumbs up. Did you get a request to be recorded? Did it show up as that we're recording? Okay, because they changed where they put all these things. And every time I look, it's like I don't always see what I want. So good. That's what I want to make sure that we're capturing this conversation. Okay, because that really came up, and then it was like, wow, your mother introduced you to Emilie. Like, yeah,
Yeah, my mom was ahead of her time. I mean, this is 1975,
yeah.
and she was already doing things at Esalen since the late 60s.
Wow.
Yeah. And she was a real full of a lot of inquiry and that I'm very grateful
Yeah, yeah, that's fabulous.
for. Mhm.
Okay, so we're going to jump into the connection to my work, which is that when I met Emilie, I already understood the biodynamic pieces of because I come from a very long lineage of farmers. Not that my parents were farmers, but my mother's family and all the way back. And so those were just essential things I had. But meeting Emilie changed, or I would say added, an incredible, incredible, profound piece, which is that everything is touched by water, and the inclusivity of biomorphic movement and expression. And that took me eventually into biomorphic movement, embryonic gesture, which I didn't study, I found inside of me. And I started following those gestures, embryological gestures. I didn't call them that then, I called them primal expression. There was something primal going on. And if I let myself track it, let myself be moved by it, it resolved and opened and created pleasure and possibilities. And it was only when I met Jaap van der Wal, the embryologist, and he's the first person uh, that I ever explained what I was doing, because I wasn't calling it continuum at that moment inside of me. I was calling it primal expression. And he said, oh, that is primal, that's embryological gesture. The embryo is within you. The embryo never leaves. The embryo is still unfolding. And it was like, yes. So that was the piece for me, for Emilie. But I want to talk about this piece because you've done wilderness work, you've brought it into nature. And Emilie didn't necessarily do that. She was exploring within her own tissue this incredible possibility of biomorphic expression. And I'm gonna read. I want to read two things for people so that you have some context of what I'm asking Susan to speak to. Not only does she demonstrate what primordial fluid looks like in the video, that's available on YouTube, on her website, and on Emilie Conrad's website. This mysterious substance, this is Emilie, uh, kind of through me, moves through every part of us, secreted into the depths of ourselves, constantly resonating with the planet and the galaxy, as revealed now in this choreography of our tissue. And she's describing what we're seeing in Susan Harper's body as Susan Harper is got her hands on the floor and her butt's in the air and her spine is moving in this just way that people are transfixed by. In my perspective, this inquiry was very biological, and it was and eventually very cosmic, but not about human emotion or ritual or dogma or spiritual achievement. This was just accessing what you beautifully said as we start to touch the natural body, the one that's still wild, that's still more deeply connected to the flow of water and fire and earth and air and space inside of us. And that deep fundamental primordial consciousness that is beneath. What Emilie would say, beneath the history, beneath the social construct, where the slime is still moving. Speak to that, Susan, because that's really, you actually took the work kind of more into, in many ways, another layer, but in your wilderness work, in that biological work, tell people what that's like. I feel like we are so lost in that today. People are, that's so disconnected to earth, to air, to water. So, yeah, what do you want to say about all that?
It's true that the impact of civilization and to become, in a certain sense, too culturally constructed, whatever the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important because every single culture has gifts and has challenges, and those are there's creative gifts through culture, but there is also a deep primordial intelligence that operates through all of life, biological life, every different kind of life expression on the planet throughout all the evolutionary history and so on. And for modern people to be so removed from earth, water, fire, air in terms of tangible relatedness. And this is what I found when I was taking people in wilderness, that the seamlessness, there starts to be inside outside loses, like the waters in our planet, the waters in our streams, the waters in our body. It's all one. It's all one flowing big process that happens. The air, our exchange with all of the green ones who give their out breath, our out breath feeds them. That reciprocity and that exchange. And yet, so many times when we're focused on breathing, we're focused only on my pattern or my habit. How do I breathe?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily in the deep relational reciprocity and the gratitude, appreciation, the respect for all the green ones offering breath. We could say we could go to the largest, greenest, slimiest algae pond and bow down. Thank you for my that that our breath is part of a circulation that's traveling throughout the entirety of this planet. And so that we can tangibly begin to feel that our interconnectedness
Mhm.
with all of the elements.
Yeah.
And then there's this deep primordial knowing that guides the embryo, that guides each life form that comes into existence. And so, how we come to more not knowing and from our intellect and everything we've ever learned, honor that. But at the same time, to be able to listen with an open, somatic and mental and heart based curiosity for the deep primordial intelligence that's moving really through all things. It's like I was hearing Francis Weller, who's a psychologist and speaks a lot about grief. And he was saying the very first trauma comes from our separation with nature. It happened thousands of years ago when humans decided human over here, nature over there, separate. And in that, when you separate from the living earth as you, it changes how you treat plants, animals, the wild. And in the true state, we're constantly in a relational dynamism with everything.
Yeah.
So if I'm always like, who am I? Who am I? Rather than who am I in relationship to the living world? If we get too centered on our own identity, we could say that we lose the world, we lose our body because the sensual, erotic uh, connection, the engagement, the attention with the sunlight and moonlight and the air and the movement of the wind in the trees, all of that erotic involvement keeps shaping and forming and informing this body. It's like, how do we have the eyes of wonder? Not wonder like an intellectual wonder, it can be there, intellectual, but the wonder of really, truly the miracle of each living thing, not a thing, each living
Be-
activity, each living being. That marveling at the world reshapes my identity because then I'm in a relational dynamism. Every relational dynamism helps keep changing and opening and strengthening and helping this body being become more resilient through the exchange, through the reciprocity.
Yes. Yeah. Thank
I
you.
don't know if that's answering what you're.
I think it sounds wonderful. Yeah. Um, so part of what I know about your work, and I've been in workshops with you, and I've taken workshops with you, but only a few, and at a specific time in your process, in your development of your work. But one of the things I notice is that you uh, you've worked your focus, not unlike Emilie's, yeah, I would say, um, did move into the emotional realm, did move into the heart-centeredness of the human organism and the field of the heart. And in fact, the movie is called Continuum, The Heart of Continuum. So that became really a kind of a key piece to the way that you taught. And you do bring ritual and you do bring traditions, and you wove in, as a weaver, I'm very aware of how people weave things into their work that aren't, I mean, Emilie would have none of that or very little of that or very specific. She had a very different way, and I really actually adore her way. And but I want you to speak to maybe how you took what Emilie the gifts that Emilie brought to you, and then wanted to create what was real for you, or again, weave in all those pieces that meant so much to you and your focus. Speak to that, because it's very different. So when we talk about continuum as a concept or as a practice or as a world of movement, each person has a very different way of approaching this. So we can't think, oh, this is Emilie's work, because at some point it's not Emilie's work anymore. It's your work. And you've partnered with her, you've taught with her, but you also created something uniquely of interest to you and those who attend your workshops.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. So this also is comes back really to Emilie's capacity for love, too, like in the melting and the softening and the resonance in the way that Emilie was uh, exploring all the fluid dynamics. It's like fluid presence. And then there's the presence of love inside of that. When we get softer and more melted, they come up into a vast field of love. And this is something that most people experience in the long retreats.
Mhm.
And then this was also her gift, was that during for quite a lot of years, Emilie recognized that I was bringing components into continuum that were beneficial for both of us, that helped the field of relationship amongst everybody, all the students, all the participants. And then there was a time when I was exploring the emotional landscape much more. Wasn't so much her cup of tea at that time. And so I had done only continuum for 15 years, and then I had a marriage falling apart, and I realized, okay, there's some aspects of my own psychology and emotional life that I don't understand. And then I went to do some in-depth work with Christine Price and Dick Price. They do Gestalt awareness practice at Esalen.
Mhm.
And in it, I met something that felt so with the deep values of continuum, listening to the organism, waiting for organismic intelligence and responsiveness.
Mhm.
And out of that, I started to develop more work around the emotional life and perceiving life, which was always of interest to me. But the habits of how we perceive shape almost everything. The
Mhm.
habit of how I perceive the world is a habit. And if I can shift even a little tiny bit, some of my most basic habitual perceiving, the world opens to me in a different way and changes me. And so, in that, then studying with Wendy Palmer, and who was an Aikido teacher that did intuitive body, and Hubert Godard, who's a French Rolfer teacher. He also was the dean of a movement analysis laboratory at the University of Paris. And I learned so much also from him about perception and how that affects our psychology.
Well, in a way, I guess, this is where I see an interesting split in the sense of, excuse me, in the sense of this biological morphic expression, which really is not about self and your story. I mean, it's leaving the story behind, and you went back to the story, is how I see it. And
Yeah,
it really was a deviation from that purity of energetic interfacing, where I am no longer human. I am not separate from, I do not have a story about that. I leave all that behind, to you weaving the ritual and heart-centered and exploring that, which I love the workshops I took. They were very profound, but they were very different for me than the I want to say purity, but it's not purity. It's like just um, it's 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 that biomorphic reality that I am not human, except that I call myself human. You know, I am water, I am air, I am, and to dissolve into all of that doesn't lose the articulation of who I am, but it doesn't necessarily need any story at all.
That's right. So it depends on which kind of workshop I'm teaching. If I'm teaching, I just did a continuum depths retreat in Japan that was 7 days long. Then going really deeply into that biomorphic, uh, just deep loosening of normal social identity of any kind, and coming down to the deep primordial where you are simply wave motion. There's such a dissolution,
Yes.
and it's at the basis, like, I think the workshop that you took with me was a body of perception, where we're much more focused on this current human modern life, but how do I open up the perceiving faculties so that there's a whole other realm of relational engagement? But
Mhm.
underlying it
Mm.
is this deep biomorphic listening. Like, underlying all of it is that intelligence operating. And how do we catch it? Like, there's a primal knowing that moves through everything, the primal knowing of a seed, knowing how to sprout and become whichever kind of seed it is. If it's an acorn, it's going to become an acorn tree, not an oak. I mean, not a maple, right?
Right.
So that primordial knowing capacity. And then how do I, as a personality, how do I stay so rooted in that primordial intelligence? How do I keep listening to that
Yeah.
so that my intellect is served by heart intelligence? My intellect is served by the deep primal or primordial knowing that's happening in all the 70 trillion cells.
Yeah.
And how do I reference that as I'm engaging in my modern world with my all the various people that I relate with? And it's like, how do we come to have way deeper, full level of experience of our more than human world, meaning all the different kinds of landscapes, creatures, all the elements. All the elements are a co-arising of everything that exists. But how do I feel that and know that primal state of belonging? The
Mm.
primal state of belonging through gravity and through the elements, all of them already belong you. So how do you perceptually belong to that which already belongs you? Because we live in a time when so many people feel so lonely and isolated and uh, um, missing the sense of belonging, because it's looking at too narrow of a range of what is belonging, meaning social belonging only,
No.
not this primal, already known belonging sensibility.
I think the workshop I took with you, I may have taken more than one, but the workshop I took with you that I specifically remember is the we were focused on the heart, and so we did a lot of work with the heart, which I really love the work of heart math and the study of the heart as an oscillator going way beyond 16 feet measured, beyond our physicality. And as a conceptual artist, perception has always been what I'm most interested in. I didn't like wake up one day saying, I want to know about the psoas muscle. I was a conceptual artist at the Boston Museum School of Fine Arts, and I was more curious about how my perception shaped my life and shaped what I was observing or being touched by, or so I agree. It's a beautiful interface. Um, I want to open it if you have something you want to say or ask me, but otherwise I'm going to go into that perspective about the belonging piece. And I'm going to take us somewhere with that because I want to leave a legacy of my relationship to Continuum. I don't belong in Continuum from the teacher's point of view. I was blessed by Emilie, which I did mention to her that, when I die, it would maybe become a problem, that I could take any of her work and use it in my work, but that I couldn't be a teacher because I already had a body of work. There was no reason. I didn't need to go teach Continuum. She was, at that point, she was having an educational process because you actually helped shape that and also instigated that because she never wanted that. And she made it very clear that I should never create a teaching system. So she was adamant that this was not what her life work was about. But she did bless me, and we did co-teach, and I did write, and we wrote something together that was published. And so I'm in a limbo of non-belonging, but belonging to everything. And so I brought up belonging as one of my conversations with you, because I want to say that Emilie was not one, she never asked anybody to belong. There was no contract of how to belong in Continuum for me when I was there. Now, you spanned what, 35, 40 years with her. I spanned a shorter time. But it was never implied. In fact, individual beings were fascinating to her. So she, unlike most systems, people from all walks of life showed up in those workshops. Some of them were scientists, some of them were intellectuals, farmers, poets, musicians, teachers, body workers, psychologists. I mean, that was the widest range of human organisms in one space at one time I've ever been in. Because usually people model and look like the teacher or behave as if this is who's going to teach me how to behave. The social order is there. And she welcomed outsiders. She welcomed that which didn't belong. She didn't want a bunch of mini Emilies in her life. And as I entered it, it was an open inquiry that we were all having, and everyone had a way of being able to contribute through their own way of being. That is very, very unique. And I am an outsider in most things. I don't belong, because to me, what belonging means is there's a differentiation that something doesn't belong. So I don't belong to clubs. I don't belong to organizations. I mean, I do on a certain level, but not in that genuine, relationship way that people want to belong. I actually seek the opposite. So when I entered Emilie's field, her studio at that time, which was really a womb, right? It was a martial arts transferred into a continuum movement. It was like I was not being asked to belong, and I was not asked to behave a certain way. There was just a real open container. And I'm really curious about that, because I think that is unique in a teaching form. And I do believe that since Emilie has passed, that implication, that veil of separation is very much there, carried through the Continuum community. I know it is, my personal experience with it. And I find that interesting. So I do want to bring up the idea of the insistence on belonging, because I don't even think there needs to be insistence on belonging. We can't not belong. You can't be on this earth or in this cosmos and not be part of it, but we just are. So I don't know what you want to say about that, but I want to bring that in, because I want people also to know that when I say, oh, go find a continuum teacher or check this out, or, because that's what I do. I distribute, I seed. That I'm more and more, I see as years go by and she's passed, more and more of the coagulating like blood of community that is continuum. And I want that blood to move. I want it to, I don't know I don't know where it needs to go, but I want to see it be something. I hope to see that it keeps flowing in that deep inquiry of biomorphic expression and not create structure, which we do, right? Density is part of what we're always dissolving. So, Susan, what do you have to say about all that?
You just named quite a lot of different
I know. You can go anywhere you are. You can pick one thread or one seed and travel wherever your heart desires.
So it's interesting the way you're speaking to belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you said there towards the end. There's a fundamental belonging that we belong in this universe. This universe is us. It's manifesting each one of us.
Yeah.
There's already inherent belonging.
Yeah, there is.
And the spirit of inquiry is really at the heart. It's really, truly at the heart of continuum from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That in that inquiry, in that way, that hopefully most all of the continuum people who fall in love with it fall in love with the spirit of inquiry. And many people have inquiry, let's say more intellectual inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
but to have a somatic, soulful sense of inquiry, and that's what like the invitation is to fall in love with that and to have a way of exploring that. And in that way, there can be a very large audience, really diverse kind of people who are interested in the work, right?
Yeah, people who wouldn't necessarily come together with each other, who have, whatever professions or belief systems, or that's what was so intriguing about who would show up and the incredible diversity.
Yeah, that diversity. And that diversity is that it's like that interest is amongst so many people, more people than we would imagine, because so many people are tired of having to fit into systems of thinking, systems of moving, systems of ways of acting.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be in the place of inquiry is strong. And that's something that both Emilie and I fostered through all the years in whichever ways we could each do that.
Yeah.
And that studio that you're naming that you were in, I actually made that studio so that it could be both Aikido could happen in there, all different kinds of movement processes could happen in there. When Emilie and I separated, then she took it over. But I worked with the architects to build that space so that there would be like
I didn't
place
know that.
to roll and pour and move and we wouldn't have to have mats per se. Yeah. And it was
I never knew that, Susan. I didn't realize you were who created that space. I thought it was a takeover of an Aikido studio.
No.
Wow, that's a whole new piece for me. Oh,
I worked with I worked with the architect. It used to be an old Oldsmobile warehouse. And when the 18th Street Arts Complex took it over, then I got to work with the architect to help design it, put in lights so we could do theater processes and put in that kind of foam floor and like just many different things about it so that it could function in a whole, like many different ways. And it was something I loved doing, creating that space. But back to our conversation on belonging. This is something that in forming our Continuum Teacher Association is really important as a value, which is that every teacher would be recognized as a carrier of the work, not just teach what happened, which is part of it, Emilie's insights, mine, but also that there's a growing process where we're growing and we're meeting people, we're meeting the times, and the work itself is able to flower and expand and open. And this is something that was just really, really important to me because, in a way, it was the gift that Emilie gave me, which was I was bringing in from the 70s, bringing in different breath, sound motifs, movement motifs, ways of understanding continuum, because I had followed Emilie into how do you get down into that creative flux and let the creative flux come through. And so Emilie was willing to let continuum be held by both of us,
Yes.
recognizing that she and I were very, very, very different. We
Yeah.
were different physically, tonals, history, but we both had a deep, deep recognition and love for the fluid state and for inquiry and for that unfolding. So in forming of Continuum Teacher Association, it was really important to take it out of that one person says who's a teacher, who's not, that it's a collective group of different teachers who witness other people who want to teach. And then we're associating with each other.
Yeah.
And associating with each other with a spirit of inquiry.
No,
Yeah.
it's true. Every single person one can go to, especially, I mean, my experience has been mostly with teachers who have been around for many years, while Emilie was alive. Um, it's a totally different experience. You can't say, oh, I've experienced continuum because I worked with so and so. In a way, I'd say, well, if you went to this person, you would experience something totally different. But it's the underlying capacity. And Emilie did have a transmission, and that transmission was phenomenal. And it did create a access point. And then the sounds that you brought in, this movement, the play that happened in that room was another way of entering into that access. For me, I often say the first time I ever fell in love was with a ball. Now, she didn't use balls, but I did. I started using balls, and I'm not even sure how I started using balls, but inflatable balls. And I would put them behind my heart, and that would create enough movement that my little stiff body could begin to all of a sudden find out, oh, yes, I actually have all this fluid going on in me. And it also surrendered. It also allowed me to fall back into a deeper, non startled or held state of expectation. So I started adding those things as my way of accessing more fluid. I don't teach continuum, but I enter into that in my personal journey. And that was why for Emilie, it was like, Liz, you can't separate it out anymore. It's, it is that biomorphic movement. It is that. And that's also at the, I would say, fundamental heart of life itself. So again, that's a gift we all have. That is who we are. That is. So if you discover it on your own, whether you call it continuum or not,
Well,
there's
that's right. So many people, when they come and meet the work, like, oh, I made sounds like this when I was a kid, or
yes,
in a certain state, like this kind of movement would naturally arise.
exactly.
And and it's like, Liz, when you've had that deep exposure like that, we can't help but share continuum and keep on playing with it. At times, Emilie did work with balls, so it's just like whatever phase you come into with Emilie or with myself, it could be uh, different timelines of what did it look like, what
Yeah.
were the values. Yeah.
Well, that's the reshaping. So that's the piece I wanted to go to next, which is um, the piece about our culture. And there's, she spoke to the immutability due to the strictures imposed upon our physical systems. And you spoke to that just now. And socially acceptable ways of moving. So in Stalking Wild SOAS, I have one essay focused on continuum and why that was a piece of how to access this wilderness, this wildness that who we are. But I love that she spoke of it as the insistence on homeostasis, and that it manifests in density and stagnation and deprivation and redundancy within. That's that same kind of idea of our patterns and exploring the structure of breath. That when I tell people we don't breathe, we are breathed. And that's why I also show those videos of you and the lateral breath and the, in my advanced courses, because to be able to recognize, and the first time I felt breathed, that there was nothing I was doing, there was nothing happening, but my whole tissue was I was being breathed. That is a transformation of the tissue of your brain, right? You can never think the same way again. So the piece I want to bring here is that it builds on a piece around somatic work that I want to pick your brain about. But Emilie said, when you take a system far from equilibrium, you increase the flow of information. And this inclusivity fosters our ability to not be threatened by the unknown. This was, to me, fundamental in my joy of being with Emilie, was her tenaciousness around naming the state that we were in as a human being and how confining it was. That whole idea of being in the prison and the prison doors are open, but the prisoner does not leave. I love her darkness. I savored it. It was like good chocolate, even though I do prefer milk. And she would, make fun of me, but call me Martha Stewart, um, uh, which, is a hard find, but it has to do with being light-skinned and, But we had a really interesting relationship around this idea of the structure of how life it keeps shaping. And it's to me, a conflict in the spiritual awakening world of being cosmically aware to the idea of moving towards the light or being full of love. I feel deep love within my tissue and for life itself, but the going out into it is now, referred to as bypassing. And, so I want to weave this back into this deep insistence that homeostasis is where we want to go, where we want to sit. Because to me, I do need a level of homeostatic relationship to show up in time and space. I call that landing and locating. I'm very much into getting into bone to feel the earth itself. And that is what SOAS speaks to, if we want to give it a message as messenger of the central midline. So within that field, the fluids are the intelligence to me. They are reshaping. So only when I move into the fluid system or fluidity of my bone, my breath, my life, my tissue, do I move into innovating a new thought, a creative process, a way of seeing the unknown as not scary, as not being hypervigilant, as not being like, that is to me how I re-enter the reality of that I am part of all of this. I am belonging. I am the beloved, as you might refer to it, as everything I do, that beautiful piece that you speak to of, you know, uh, awareness, which is what my work is called. It's the awareness of it. The awareness is the not a dissolving the insistence that I am me and you are you, and whatever separation, whatever we want to call it. Um, Do I'm making sense that in clarity? I know I'm making sense, but clarity around the spiritual piece that I feel is evoked a lot, that you explore and have a deep, profound relationship with, and the traditions of some of the beautiful countries you've spent deep time in and space in, with people who have traditional spiritual practices, to this biological insistence that shapes our traditions, that shape our religions, that shape our cultures, that I don't know, like, how do we stop insisting that that's the right way, or this is, and I know you've worked with that because you've played in those different, I want to say levels, right, of different tissue, but also different um, perceptions. I want you to speak to that because I feel like, what do I want to say? I want to say that continuum isn't a bypassing at all. It's an actual way of showing up here in time and space. It does create tremendous pleasure in all ways, that life is a sensual flow. But ultimately, it's entering into something that's very profound for humanity, as well as all more than human life.
Mm. We, as we, as we deepen in the fluid state, fluid presence, as we deepen in that, it's inherently spiritual. It's inherently connected. And the challenge over and over again is, how do I, in whatever way I've adapted myself to be safe in my culture, in my family of origin, whatever way I have made all the physical and emotional, psychological adaptations so that I can be uh, relevant in my cultural frames, that also this place where we come into a kind of deeper dissolution, softening all that physically, but also taking off some of the layers of inhibition that were laid in.
Mhm.
We take an inhibition, let's say, if it wasn't okay for me to express a sensual pleasure, that in my family of origin that wasn't okay. I create these layers of inhibition, both psychologically and physically. They're always simultaneously together. So the psychological impact and then the physicality of it. We create a constraint on our own physicality. So as I'm playing in the fluid state, as I'm playing in the, like, all the different ways of moving in this biomorphic and the fluid state, there's a fluid presence that is love that's coming about. And I pick myself back up after a dive. And then the art is, how do I weave that into my everyday activity?
Mhm.
How do I find the way of taking that primal interconnected connectedness state? And so that whatever I look at or participate with, there's a deeper vision, a deeper sensibility that's underlying that.
Mhm.
And it helps me to stop objectifying and projecting my objectifications on everything.
Mm.
It helps me stay relational. This heart, this body, heart, mind needs to be relational, needs to offer, needs to pray and play and move in a fundamentally alive way.
Mhm.
And so then it's like, okay, how do I meet? How do I listen? How do I, like, listen to whoever it is that I'm encountering? How do I listen from so deep behind and underlyingly? How do I listen from the earth in the bones of me? How do I listen in the waters of me? How do I listen from the breath of me? It's like when you see any fairly healthy, well-born infant, you see we are being breathed.
Mhm.
Baby's not concerned about trying to breathe. You see it, breath happening in the bottoms of the feet. You see the breath in the being breathed state or being breathed by a larger planetary body. And we have that sense of connectedness until we are learning too much how to create the separation
Mhm.
and different patterns of restriction in order to belong socially rather than the innate belonging. So we all go through like whatever culture, whatever family of origin, we make all kinds of adaptations. And then we have this opportunity to come into inquiry. Do I still need, at that level of unconscious habit, adaptation, do I really still need to keep doing that? And then love is like, how do I walk in this world with more deep, loving capacity? And so, in some of the traditions that I have studied, come from people who are already somatically so well connected in their context. They don't need a workshop in somatic connection that's already there. And so then they're exploring different states of consciousness.
Yes.
Everywhere we go in movement, and especially in the really deep movement with breath and playing with our timing, so that sometimes we're coming so slow down that we're entering into primal, like mythic time, dream time, uh, kairos time. We're entering into timeless time. And you come up out of that and you come back into this world of click, tick, tick tock time. But it's like, how do I keep some flavor of that
Mhm.
while I also make sure that we make this appointment on time and we have this conversation? And it's like living with the paradox of time and timeless time, right?
Mhm.
How do we live with the anguish of what's happening in our shared social world and still have a deep flavor of the loving rootedness, connectedness to the cosmos, to the wholeness, and to come to know all of that is coming through us. I'm a fan of Brian Swim, who's a cosmologist, and he says it's radical. It's radical. Emergence is a radical. There's no galaxy, and then there's a galaxy within galaxies. You have the birth of planets, which one of them becomes alive.
Yeah.
How do I hook into that fundamental stream of universal emergence,
Yeah.
not as a bypass, but as a one more physical expression of this universe, and meet the terrible anguish of what we're seeing, the brutality, the violence, the trauma, like to be not blind to that, but to be holding that from a deep, deep rooted, known place of love,
Yeah.
and to offer compassion as a practice again and again, self and other. Yeah. I don't know if that's speaking to what you were asking.
I think it is. I think it's important to verbalize it, um, because people, well, because this is the last piece I want to talk to you about, which is kind of weaves it in. I've been an educator for 54 years, um, and I've watched. There was no, I mean, there was always the word soma, but there was no somatic education, right? Yoga only existed if you went to an ashram. So I'm from your generation. I'm a year older than you are. You look a lot younger than I do. All that juicy stuff you do. Um, but so somatics to me is disturbing of how it's being utilized now, and it's because I like to be very critical. I really like differentiation. I'm actually, not into emergence. I'm into differentiation. And so I like to articulate things. And one of the things I want to articulate as we close in this conversation is what is happening now, is specifically in the somatic realms. It's a it's a piece that I'm watching, and the piece I'm watching is a calming of the nervous system, an insistence. It is an insistence on calming the nervous system, on regulating, on self-regulating. And to me, as an organism, I am a mammal and I co-regulate, as you're so much speaking to. It is about co-regulation, not self-regulation. Not that I don't have some control over that, but it's not a control over the system. And I see it in all kinds of language and kind of ways that people are educating of an insistence that is not universal in it's specifically in the States, of this regulatory capacity, whether it's our vagus nerve or our overall nervous system or to, but what I actually see is a suppression of expression. I start seeing, I wrote some notes just because I knew at some point I'd want to speak to it. The general public has become, somatics has become synonymous with calming down rather than complex expressions. And it's actually what you are speaking of is complex expressions, a beautiful diversity of feeling and expression and heartfelt. And it's held by love, but it can be a whole lot of different perceptions and awareness and expressions. And it shows up on our faces and it shows up in our tissue and it shows up how our movements. And rather that being celebrated, we're kind of dominating the culture with this kind of trying to self-regulate, trying to calm us all down. And I understand um, that some of what you're doing with sound is the allowing of the complexity to show up. And I don't mean cathartic, release. I've worked a lot on educating people around the difference of cathartic release versus expression and the range of expressions that we have in the tissue. And you speak really beautifully of that. And you yourself have a flow to your expression, but the range is like an artist's palette, right? It's a range is like a creativity of ways that we want to show up in the world. And that each of us are going to show up differently and uniquely ourselves. And I am never going to hold what you hold. I'm going to be me, right? But I want that complexity of expression. I don't want to dump it down so we all have a certain look on our face so that we all know the other person isn't going to attack us. And so it has this kind of calming Vegas event going on that has my animal body is quite wild. I mean, it just like, it's like, I wouldn't trust that for the world, right? I have very good instincts, you know. So as somebody who comes from that beautiful place of softening, speak to this as our last piece, because I know we've reached our time here. Um, what do you invite people to do instead of trying to just hold it down, like just calm yourself down and everything will be right. There's times when it's very good to be up and aroused, right?
Yes, totally. I agree with you. It's not about calming down. It's about we want to know if we want to be able to calm down to know how to do so.
Yep.
But full range of expression in the face, full range of expression in the whole body. So in really every continuum workshop that I teach, there's some phase where it's biomorphic, shape changing, becoming wild, like with claws and teeth and eyes and just really full, deep expression. Our whole range of expression is what helps us stay regulated, in fact.
Yeah.
An infant goes quickly from upset to happy to like frightened to joyous. It's like a quick shifting of emotional state. We want that micro expression also to let all the various feelings come through. My version of love is that the primary word of it is allowing, allowing the uniqueness of each and every expression, to allow the huge full range that this planetary body has come up with. How many different kinds of faces has this planetary body come up with? That those are capable, we're capable of knowing them, experiencing them, having them. I agree with you. It's like I'm going to read a piece of the news and be like, then, come down to like, okay, I'm also trailing like deep, powerful, connected beauty and leaving trail of that, not in a Hollywood kind of a way, but in a like nature based way. Nature takes every kind of expression. It includes all of it, and that's love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So love doesn't mean that we have to look a certain way or be kind every second, like, but to have an underlying fundamental kindness of willingness and openness for expression, yours, mine, and to really support the uniqueness of each being. And this is again where I really honor Emilie. It was like she didn't attempt to make me like her, like you said at one of the comments. It was like she honored, sometimes struggled with my difference, but that's okay. That's just part of life. We're working out, what is that? What does that mean for us to have diversity? And it's what the earth teaches is diversity, multiplicity, huge range of expression. So wholeness means no part left out.
Yeah.
Wholeness means no parts left out. And that's big work for us. How do we hold such whole big huge range? Yeah, and be willing to say no where no is needed and yes where yes is needed, and have the rub and the diversity and the individuation and connectedness, the paradox of that.
It is a paradox. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.